In this video, we will explore which flagship smartphone is a superior camera system, the Google Pixel 10 Pro XL or the iPhone 16 Pro Max. My friends, today we're going to be looking at the Google Pixel 10 Pro XL against the iPhone 16 Pro Max. This is a very interesting test. I'm really hoping it's the only one that you need to watch because I'm going to cover everything, both photo and video. So thank you to everyone who hit that like button and subscribed to the channel. And with that, I'm going to start with video first, but I'm going to look at basic settings. We're going to look at color brightness, dynamic range, highlight control, macro mode, low light, 5x optical zoom. The Google smartphone has resolution, the 8K video feature and the slow motion, and so much more. If you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment below. Like and subscribe, we have more content coming soon. Now we're going to start with video mode with process 8K standard mode. Let's get into it. Now I think overall all the video modes looked good there. The Apple, of course, has a little bit more color information when corrected with that. But the 8K video boost feature from Google is really impressive too. Here with the side-by-side both in 4K. Now here I'm testing the image stabilization, and I think walking through these view, we can see that the 16 Pro Max image stabilization does a little bit better there. Moving back over to the Pixel 10 Pro XL, their video mode has really improved since their previous cameras. Moving over now to the 16 Pro Max, wonderful looking image, and back over to the Pixel 10 Pro XL, there's an 8K video boost. And one thing I want to point out with the 8K video boost feature from the Pixel 10 Pro XL, it does have to upload to the Google Drive and it processes there, but then you just download it again. But overall, I think it's a great feature because it for sure improves the image quality and the image stabilization as well. Now moving over here to portrait mode, Pixel 10 Pro XL, 16 Pro Max cinematic mode. Let's continue here with the Pixel 10 Pro XL portrait mode. It's really the same as cinematic mode that you get with the 16 Pro Max. I think both cameras did well there, but one thing I want to point out, the Pixel 10 Pro XL is high definition in portrait mode, and it does seem overall that does make a difference for image quality. Now here in portrait mode once again, and I wanted to test how well do those cameras handle backlighting in video mode. Moving back over to standard video, 16 Pro Max, lot of detail there. And here Pixel 10 Pro XL. Here's a side-by-side there on the Pixel 10 Pro XL on the left. Back to full screen Pixel 10 Pro XL, checking the image stabilization and just overall image quality. Now moving over to the 16 Pro Max standard video, it does really well in image stabilization. Pixel 10 Pro once again on top, a lot of detail there. And there's that 16 Pro Max video resolution. Okay, for these next tests we're going to move to slow motion. iPhone 16 Pro Max now has 120 frames per second at 4K. Now the Pixel 10 Pro XL does have 240 frames a second, but it's only in 1080p. Let's compare those quality-wise and see what we find here. The Pixel 10 Pro XL, 240 frames a second. And there's that 16 Pro Max with 4K, 120 frames a second. I think there we could see that at 240 frames per second, the Google did take a hit in image quality. And I think iPhone got it right by doing 4K 120 frames per second, but still maintaining high image quality. Now let's move over to 60p on both cameras. Here's the Pixel 10 Pro XL 4K 60p. Now moving over to the 16 Pro Max 4K 60 frames a second, slow motion looks really nice. Back over to the Pixel 10 Pro XL, 60 frames a second. And here we are once again, 16 Pro Max. So for this next test, I'm going to use the 120 frames per second from the iPhone and the 60p from the Pixel 10 Pro XL, because they're both in 4K, and here we have the Pixel 10 Pro XL in 4K, 60 frames a second. And now moving over to the 16 Pro Max in 4K, 120 frames per second. And we can see we have great dynamic range, and once again, that 16 Pro Max is. The 120 frames per second 4K from the 16 Pro Max is quite impressive. Now moving back over to standard 4K on both cameras, and we can see that the 16 Pro Max actually has it as well, That's pretty common with these cameras. Back over to the Pixel 10 Pro XL. Now for this shot, I'm using the 2x zoom in on the Pixel 9 Pro XL. And here's that 2x zoom from the 16 Pro Max. And let's go ahead and finish this series with support 5x optical zoom here with the Pixel 10 Pro Max maintaining that quality. And now with the 16 Pro Max, 5x optical zoom overall provided a very nice image. Now for these next two shots, I'm using the ultra-wide lens, and I think both cameras did just okay in that. Here's the Pixel 10 Pro XL ultra-wide. We can see some blurring there on the edges. And yet the 16 Pro Max has that as well. I think the ultra-wide is a nice feature to have, but you're going to definitely take a hit in image quality on both models. Now moving back over to the Pixel 10 Pro XL, let's get started with photos. Okay, here we have a side-by-side landscape, both primary cameras. Now we're moving over to the ultra-wide lens. Now one thing I do want to mention here, with the 16 Pro Max and Google Pixel 10 Pro XL, both is 48 megapixels as well in the ultra-wide lens. That's a really nice feature that they've upgraded with. Now for this next set of images, we're going to be looking at some color settings, starting here with the Pixel 10 Pro XL and Apple, and now moving over to the Pixel 10 Pro XL. And we can see there that the Pixel 10 Pro XL does have more dynamic range in the highlights and in the shadows when you move over to the setting. And here are the 16 Pro Max and 48 megapixel. Here's a side-by-side image. The 16 Pro Max there on the right. Both cameras doing really well. Now for these two images, back to standard mode. And between that set of photos, to me, yes, the imagery is a little softer and it would require more editing. But I think overall, since you get more dynamic range, more color information, you can do more with the images and get a lot out of them. Now for this next set, I'm going to move over to some low-light imagery, but I will come back to that testing soon. Here we have the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and here's that 16 Pro Max. And here's that ultra-wide lens on that Pixel 10 Pro XL, and the ultra-wide lens on the 16 Pro Max. And I think both cameras do well with color, but some colors are much different. Now for this next set of photos, I'm moving over to some other photo. And really, I think overall, some great imagery to look at for a comparison. With these two images, we'll start with the primary camera, both at 50 and 48 megapixel. And here's another side-by-side. Now you can see that both cameras are very detailed. Okay, here we are in portrait mode, both cameras set to auto white balance, and we can see that both cameras render the colors differently. I think the 16 Pro Max was a little bit more true to life as far as the color of the photo. But yet, in the Pixel 10 Pro XL and iPhone 16 Pro Max, both really great. Moving back now over to the primary camera here, and here's the Pixel 10 Pro and the 16 Pro Max. Another wide shot here with the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and there's that 16 Pro Max once again. Here we are with the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and moving over to the 16 Pro Max. And now moving over to the 5x optical zoom. Now I'm going to punch in real quickly, and let's see if that 48 megapixel on that 5x optical zoom does make a difference. Indeed it does, my friends. The Pixel 10 Pro XL there on the left is sharper. One thing that I wish Apple would have done with this 16 Pro Max is brought that 48 megapixel to that 5x optical zoom like they did with the ultra-wide lens, because it does make a difference. Now here we are in portrait mode once again, and let's look at the macro mode. Now here you would think that this is portrait mode, but it's actually the primary cameras, very impressive, both phones, image quality. And now here we are once again in portrait mode. We can see the 16 Pro Max does render skin tones a little warmer. Now here for this next set, I wanted to do some extreme backlight. I'm starting with the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and you can see some color banding there in the photo. So it does make a difference. Overall, it maintains smooth gradients, and we also have more dynamic range and shadow and highlight detail. And now moving over to the 16 Pro Max. So there in that test, we can see that if you have really tricky lighting, that processing does make a difference. Now moving over to a side-by-side, I also wanted to test the 48 megapixel. Here we have it with the Pixel 10 Pro XL, and there's the 16 Pro Max. I think if I'm shooting outside, I'm going to go full resolution unless I'm in extreme low light. Now for these next tests, let's go ahead and continue with that. Now with the wide shot with the Pixel 10 Pro XL, still with 50 megapixel. And there's that 48 megapixel with the 16 Pro Max. Now back over to standard photo mode, still using the primary camera. Here's another side-by-side, both primary cameras. And here's that 5x optical zoom. And I'm going to go ahead and crop in that you show, and once again we can see when we look in there on the left, the Pixel 10 Pro XL with that 48 megapixel. It's a little bit sharper. And now moving back over to the primary cameras, here's that ultra-wide lens again. And here's another macro where the Pixel 10 Pro XL does maintain 48 megapixel. Now for this next set of images, I'm going to have the Pixel 10 Pro XL on the left. And we can see there that image definitely has more color depth. And there, we are again there on the right.